If you've seen this film called Forrest Gump, which I'm guessing most of you must have seen, there is a scene in which Forrest Gump, or Mr. Tom Hanks, is standing at the Washington Memorial. He's dressed up in his army uniform, and there is a massive protest going on. That actually happened because that was the protest against the Vietnam War. And lots of these protests happened during that time, mostly organized by the American left. And the leftists of those days were not really like the ones that we see today in America and Europe and India. They didn't just protest against things for the sake of protesting. They had a reason, and I might not agree with their way of thinking, but at least I respect that they stood up for things that really mattered, like not going to war. So anyways, that protest really happened. A lot of anti-war protest was going on at that time. And a big part of those protests was the music, because some of the biggest bands of those times, from the Doors to Grateful Dead, Frank Zappa, CSNY, if you are a fan of classic rock, you'll know all these names. All of them would play these concerts, and a whole lot of protesters would gather around. They would sing songs, and anti-war music became a genre of itself. This was one of the biggest reasons why the anti-war protests got so much attention. Now, why am I telling you this story? I thought this video was supposed to be about Deepika Padukone. The reason for that is the fact that many years after this protest got over and the war got over, after America lost, a lot of information came out. And the world found out that the protest was organized by the American deep state itself. That a lot of the agents of the deep state became the actors who were very active in starting these protests and continuing them. A few decades ago, when the parent society of the USA, that is the British Empire, they did such an experiment very successfully with India. When they saw that there was a good chance that the Indians are going to start protesting against the British Raj, and rather violently, in this pressure cooker of anti-British protests, they installed a valve by the name of Mahatma Gandhi. So every time they would sense that the pressure was building up, Mr. Gandhi would launch one of his andolans. Everybody who wanted to protest would see Mr. Gandhi doing something, so they would follow him, not knowing that it would lead to nowhere. It was simply a way for the British to control the opposition. Similarly, in this anti-Vietnam protest scene, the Americans, the CIA, or the deep state, whatever you want to call it, they put their own people in the protests and turned what could have been a genuine protest and a threat to the American war activities in the East into nothing but a controlled opposition situation. But there was another coincidence. A lot of these bands that I spoke about, who were very active in the anti-war movement, a lot of these bands were the children of high-ranking members of the US military, from Jim Morrison to Frank Zappa, David Crosby. All of them were the children of US military officers and high-ranking officers. Isn't that a bit of a coincidence? I mean, Jimi Hendrix, he actually served in the army. One day he's serving in the army, next day he's a guitar god and a world-famous musician. A bit too convenient, isn't it? Similarly, a lot of them died very young and very suspicious deaths. Among rock and roll fans, it is known as the 27 Club, because a lot of them died at the age of 27. And very conveniently, they died because of drug overdoses. If any of you are interested, a lot of research was done by David McGovern, and he even wrote a book about it. I would highly recommend that you go and read it. It's quite a read. with a lot of proof. So anyways, the point I'm making here is that music played a crucial role in bringing attention to this anti-war movement, and it helped to mobilize a lot of young people to this war protest, which was controlled by the US deep state, which meant that these people would not go somewhere else and start their own independent protest. This is what the West does. And this is what they have done since after the Second World War, which is when the US really came into its final form and became the world's police. You could say that it all began in 1947, when the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, was created. And right from the get-go, one of the things they did was they put money into art, because they realized at that point that this investment would give them a 100 times return, because art would raise their prestige internationally. Good movies, good music, good painters, good artists. And secondly, you can use art to spread propaganda for yourself or against your enemies. It works both ways. It's a fantastic investment. Is there any surprise then that most of the popular content, whether it is today, whether it was 20 years before, everything comes out of America? The best singers, the rock stars are American. The best movies, American. Best TV shows, American. Is that a coincidence? There's plenty of good content being made elsewhere in the world. How come that doesn't become super popular? Either you'll see American content or British content. Well, Britain is nothing but a vassal state of America, so Americans created these institutions like Hollywood. Take the most recent example, the movie Top Gun. What a wonderful propaganda it is for the US Air Force. If somebody was to do some research on this data, I have no doubt that applications to join the USAF were much higher this year when Top Gun was released than before. An action movie, planes flying all over the place, the whole lifestyle is made to look so glamorous. There are tens of thousands of boys and girls who, after the movie, wanted to join the Air Force. This is a fantastic method of recruiting people for your armed forces, and it is also a fantastic method of setting a certain image of your country and of your armed forces abroad. And this multimedia propaganda is one of the reasons why the world is still very much dominated, disproportionately, but very much dominated by the West. And by the West, I mean America and some of its most trusted allies. Something that comes out of DC or Paris or Brussels or London is given much more importance than something that comes out of Durban or Moscow or New Delhi or Beijing. The West remains powerful because it can shape various fields of human activity, whether it's political, economical, and also cultural. And as a result of this, the West has something which we call symbolic capital. The symbolic capital gives you that certain extra weight that nobody else has. Let's take the example of medals and awards. When you usually meet people, you are your polite self. When you meet somebody who you don't know, that is. But when you meet somebody new for the first time and they have something extra to them, for example, you get to know that somebody is a war hero, or that somebody is a award-winning physicist. All of a sudden, your impression of them changes. All of a sudden, everything that they say has more weight. You pay more attention to it, simply because they have a symbolic capital. The symbolic capital of a medal, of an award, or an advanced degree. Like, for instance, somebody who has a master's in history, he or she will be listened to with more intent than a person who's just a history buff, so to say. So this is the symbolic capital. America has the symbolic capital. They have the movies, the music, the magazines, the TV shows, the celebrities. And they also have the awards, the Grammys, the Oscars, the Nobel Prize. Sure, it is Swedish, but that doesn't matter. Sweden is not really a country. There again, just like the rest of the West. They are just little puppies of Daddy USA. So this symbolic capital that the West has, they use it very, very smartly. When the West has to spread their agenda or their propaganda, they use many different kind of actors for it. They could use their politicians, but what the West likes is to use puppets that can be propped up easily and brought down easily. With politicians or people who are in the legal field, they can be propped up pretty easily, but they're difficult to bring down. Thus, the West devised this method of using cultural icons, so to say, or rather pop culture icons. And they're very smart about it. They're very quick about it. For example, that girl, Malala, who got shot in Pakistan, instantly the West gives her a Nobel Prize. She becomes an international celebrity, and now she goes around the world doing whatever they tell her to do. Whatever the topic they want her to speak on, she goes and speaks about it. And because she has a book and she has a Nobel Prize, everybody wants to listen to her. She's an incredible fraud. But I know grown-up people who are much older than me, who take her seriously. And that just blows my mind. Similarly, we have an example in our country as well. The infamous Arundhati Roy. I don't know how many of you have read her book. And I think it's the only book she has written, is it? I think she does more activism than writing. But anyways, Arundhati Roy, she has been one of the best investments for the West. She wrote a slightly above average book. She's given the book a prize, and all of a sudden she becomes an international celebrity. Isn't that wonderful? Just give somebody a little prize, and then you can use them for years and years and years to spread your propaganda. Is there a person that has been more anti-national consistently over the years than this woman? And she is nothing but a useful idiot of the West. Every single thing that happens, which is for the good of this country, for the progress of this country, this woman wants to oppose. In 2008, Patrick Duddy, a former ambassador, had requested his government, the federal government, for some aid, quote unquote, aid. And in the cable that he sent back to Washington, he wanted the funding, quote, to influence the information environment within Venezuela. The strategy's goal is to counter the active and deliberate campaign by the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to instill in the population a negative perception of the US and distort more than 100 years of close and mutually beneficial relations between our two countries, end quote. When you read about it, it sounds so good that a concerned American is trying very hard to ensure that Venezuelan-American relations do not go bad. And this was in 2008. Now we fast forward 3 years. In 2011, the National Endowment for Democracy secretly paid over $20,000 to rock bands in Venezuela. They sent this money to Venezuela through a right-wing group, which later was involved in attempting a coup against the Venezuelan government. The grant stated that the program's purpose was to promote greater reflection among Venezuelan youth about freedom of expression, their connection with democracy, and the state of democracy in the country. On a side note, these words are very important. Whenever America starts speaking about freedom, democracy, liberty, freedom of speech, and worst, if they start speaking about the state of democracy in your country, you better know that they're coming for you. You better know that you are in trouble. Anyways, the American government sends $20,000 to rock bands in Venezuela. To what? To create songs against the rulers. And the agency that sent money to Venezuela was the National Endowment for Democracy, which was created by the Reagan administration in 1983. And the main purpose of this institution, which is a semi-government agency, this institution is to provide funding and training to political parties and non-governmental organizations, NGOs abroad, especially those who oppose governments that do not see eye to eye with America. The point is that the West has built these institutions. These institutions have symbolic capital. that symbolic capital is used to prop up useful idiots who can then go ahead and spread the Western propaganda, like in the case of the classic rock bands during the Vietnam protests, or in the case of people like Arundhati Roy, who were trained and propped up to fight against their own people. And now we can finally come to the topic of Deepika. She is not an intellectual, she is not an author, so a Nobel or a Booker Prize cannot be given to her. In different ways, her image can be built up. Think about this. Why would she be a part of the award ceremony at the FIFA World Cup final? Would you ever see, let's say for example, would you ever see a Korean movie star coming to present the IPL cricket trophy? It doesn't make sense, does it? Or would you see a Brazilian celebrity come to the Cricket World Cup and be a part of the award ceremony? Then why would an Indian movie star who's not very well known outside the country be a part of the award ceremony? Similarly, she's being invited to the Oscars. How many people know her? Think about this. Priyanka Chopra has been working in Hollywood for quite some time now. And she's still not very big. Not many people know her. I mean, most of the fandom that she has is probably because most of the people in the subcontinent and the NRIs are pretty excited about having one of their own working regularly in Hollywood. And even then, if you go to her IMDb and look it up, she's not really working too much. She's doing some TV show here, something over there. Nothing big. If she was an American star, American actor, she would not really be given much attention. And don't believe me, go ahead and pull up the page of any of your favorite TV stars. I'm not even saying go to the top Hollywood actors. I'm saying just some, sitcom star and just compare their page with her page. She's not really working much. So if Priyanka, who's in the middle of the scene, trying to get as much work as possible, if she is not that well known, who would even know Deepika? Because I don't think she has ever worked abroad. And if somebody brings up the fact that she goes to Cannes every year, then anybody can go to Cannes. If you have money, you can go to Cannes. So the fact that she suddenly goes to the FIFA World Cup final and then she is going to be a presenter at the Oscars indicates at the fact, and of course also taking in consideration her recent history, that she wants to talk about all the social issues, the trending social issues. She goes to JNU during the protests and the typical anti-Hindu, anti-India discourse that she indulges in. It is very obvious for anybody to see that she is being propped up as a useful idiot. The West considers her useful enough to be a presenter at the Oscars, but not enough to be a fake nominee or a fake award that is fast losing its significance. I mean, think about it. The Nobel Prizes are fake. Who cares about the Nobel Prize? Maybe the Nobel Prize for, sciences has something in it. But the other ones, especially the Nobel Peace Prize, I mean, think about it. They gave the Nobel Peace Prize to Barack Obama. Barack Obama is the only president in the history of America during whose presidency America was bombing some part of the world every single day. And this guy has been given the Nobel Peace Prize. If you go through the Nobel Peace Prize winners list, it contains such illustrious people such as Mother Teresa, Yasser Arafat, and of course the Malala of Pakistan, and Barack Obama. So if Nobels are fake, then Oscars are definitely fake. In fact, I can give you one more example of this. That man who constantly embarrasses himself. No, I'm not talking about Rahul. Yes, Veer Das. He is another useful idiot that has been propped up by the West. The guy is not funny. And I'm not saying this because, I do not see eye to eye with him. It's very difficult to see eye to eye with a fool. But this guy, they've propped him up. They let him come to America. He's allowed to perform at the Kennedy Center or whatever irrelevant arena he performs at. But he's not important enough to be given an HBO special. or to be given a Hollywood project. They've thrown him a small bone, and then now they want to wait and watch and see how he performs. So when he goes and gives that to India speech, the West loves it, because as a native he's qualified to speak about his people. But since they have bought him, everything he says is going to be pretty bad. Basically what Rahul Gandhi does when he goes abroad, Mr. Veerdas does from the comedy stage. So when Deepika is invited to the Oscars to present an award, and it's going to be some irrelevant award, I'm guessing, best OST or best costume or something like that. That is my guess. But that is not important. What is important is this is an attempt of the American deep state, of the CIA, whoever, to build up Deepika as the Angelina Jolie of the East. She gets to present an award. She goes to the FIFA World Cup final. A few more events like this, and the world begins to know her. You know, that dusky girl from India, oh, she's so pretty, and she's smart, and she's hanging out with all the smart people. There'll be certain photo ops. And soon we will see Deepika clicking pictures with the Obamas and with other progressive politicians of America, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, famously known as AOC. And little by little, she'll be known around the world. And by the time the 2024 elections in India are happening, she would have spit enough venom against PM Modi, against the Hindus, against India. All it takes is a bit of symbolic capital, and just like that, the West has propped up a new useful idiot. I will not be surprised if in the coming year, Deepika gets to work abroad. If she gets some part in some movie or some TV show, I will not be surprised. And I also expect her to get a lot more international exposure. And the more exposure she gets, the more vocal, the more anti-national she is going to become. That is my guess. Because this is what the West does. The West is always waiting for the useful idiots to come fall in its lap. And I'll say something now that I have been saying on my social media for over a year now. From now all through to 2024 elections, there will be attacks from all sides. From the news media, the New York Times, to your TV channels, to your celebrities, your Hassan Minhaj and that South African guy who claims to be a stand-up comedian, what's his name? And then your Deepikas and your Arundhatis, your Malalas and Gretas and Rihannas and... But I think I'm pretty confident in the ability of Modi and company. Although they're not very good at setting the narrative or getting ahead of the narrative, but I still believe that they should be able to handle this. But one of the reasons they will be able to handle this is because people like us, people who care about this country, people who want this Prime Minister to be elected again, they care enough about these matters, and more importantly, they know enough about these matters now that they're willing to not just remain unaffected by these propaganda operations, they're also concerned enough to do something against it. So I believe once again the power of the social media will be one of the big reasons why PM Modi will come back to power in 2024. This was my attempt at explaining how the West functions, the kind of institutions West props up, the kind of symbolic capital that it manufactures and hoards, and the way it hands it to useful idiots. And I hope you've learned a thing or two from this podcast. Is this a podcast? What is this? It does not even have a name. Should I name this something? Should this be a thing? You tell me. And if you are still listening to this podcast right now, please send me a message on Instagram, because I would like to thank you personally. I want to thank you for supporting me and for listening to this podcast. And if this should be a thing, then please send me a message with a name. I need a name for this, and maybe, who knows, I'll make this a thing. Till the next time I see you.